This is lab 16 on the dog specimen. So today we'll be entering the abdominal cavity. So you need to reflect and then make incisions for your abdominal muscles. So this side, the left side, has already been reflected down. All you have to do is make an incision just dorsal to that rectus abdominis, kind of all the way down to the inguinal ring area down here. And then on the right side, you're just kind of cutting just dorsal to where you see that rectus abdominis. So just coming down similar to the other side. Then you're going to connect them cranially here and make a big flap of muscle coming down. So you'll cut through the peritoneum that lines the peritoneal cavity, obviously. So you have parietal peritoneum, which is lining the walls, just like every other parietal, and then visceral, which is going to be covering all of the organs inside the cavity. I also make an incision kind of just behind the costal arch here so that you can open up the sides of the abdomen a little bit more to get a better view. So you can do that if that helps you. And then also, just a fair warning, there's a lot of terms on this lab, so just bear with me. It'll be a little long, but it's not too hard. It's mainly just pointing things out and seeing all the parts. Okay, so then on your reflected abdominal muscles, you'll be looking for this kind of fatty-filled area, and this is the falciform ligament. So from the umbilicus up towards the liver is the falciform ligament here, and then from the umbilicus back to the bladder is the median ligament of the bladder. So that's right here. The bladder is actually this little bulge you see right here in the forceps, and this is that median ligament of the bladder here. So median ligament, falciform ligament, very filled with fat usually in most animals. Some young animals, you'll see then where this was attached. I'll flip it back up just for reference here. This was attached here, and so sometimes you'll see a remnant of the round ligament right here, and so it'll be kind of going between the lobes of the liver. Mine doesn't really have one, but you might see one there. That's the round ligament of the liver. Sorry, I just said round ligament, but round ligament of the liver could be there in young animals. All right, then we have the vaginal ring, which is something we've talked about before. I'll try and pull it out on this side. So here, you have your uterus here, and if you're looking for the vaginal ring, it's going to be in that inguinal area, so as you move caudally. And so the vaginal ring is right here, and you're going to have a bunch of fat basically around that opening that then marks the deep inguinal ring. So the vaginal ring is here, and then that reflection of the transversalis fascia is making that deep inguinal ring. I know it's a hard concept, but so vaginal ring here then marks the location of where it actually goes through that deep inguinal ring here. All right, and we have a female, so we don't have a ductus deferens in this one, but we do have the caudal epigastric artery and vein. So here, you'll have it on both sides, but I just uncovered on one side. So this is the caudal epigastric artery, and running right next to it is a vein. However, in mine it's not injected, so you can't really see it very well, but it is there. So caudal epigastric artery and vein running on the deep surface of that rectus abdominis muscle. All right, then we'll move on to some of the contents of the abdomen here. We will start with the greater omentum, which is the lacy stuff that you see covering your intestines. So that is here, and you just kind of peel it off and move it out of the way. So you don't have to go through it and tear it apart, you just kind of lift it up as a sheet. And it does have a deep and a superficial leaf, and if you pull those apart, if I can get them, you'll have a bursa inside there. So that space that I'm opening up by pulling those two leaves apart is the omental bursa in the greater omentum. You also have a lesser omentum on the lesser curvature of the stomach, which is right here. So it's not as obvious, but it's this stuff right here is the lesser omentum. And so this is your stomach. Here's your lesser curvature of the stomach here. And then your greater curvature is here, where that greater omentum is attaching. All right, then we have the urinary bladder we did point out, but they can vary greatly in size. So mine is empty, and it's just very small and hard, a little ball right there. That's the urinary bladder. And then we have a female, so we have the uterus here. So here you have the horns, the uterine horns, and then here where they're connected is the uterine body. And then if you dig down a little bit, where the probe is pointing is actually the bulge that would be the cervix. So you can palpate that if you have a female and see where that cervix is, and it's just that enlargement right there. All right, then we'll move on. The spleen is this big enlarged organ you see right here. And so that's been enlarged due to the barbiturates they used during the euthanasia process. So the spleen is here. And then the gastrosplenic ligament, gastro meaning stomach, which is in my hand, and then splenic, spleen. So gastrosplenic ligament is just the connective tissue going between those two organs. And then the diaphragm. So we'll take a look at the diaphragm and name all of its different parts. So obviously the diaphragm is here. So here's the liver in my hand, and diaphragm is all of this here. We'll kind of go back and forth between a cranial view and a caudal view to see things. But this kind of opaque area here, there you can see my fingers through it. That's the tendinous center of the diaphragm. And then if we go to a little bit of a cranial view, you'll see this is that tendinous center here. But then we have the lumbar parts, and those are the left and right crura, so left crus and right crus, which is the muscular part. So this muscular attachment right here would be the left crus of the diaphragm, and you have a similar one on the right side. So just that muscular attachment is the lumbar part, and it's called a crus. All right, then you have the attachments going to the ribs. So here, along the ribs, would be the costal part. And then the part attaching to the sternum, here in my hand, would be the sternal part, so right here. And then the cupula is basically just the dome, the bulge coming into the thoracic cavity. So if I put my hand here, you can see that it kind of makes a dome around my hand, and that's the cupula. Then we have some holes we have to name that go through the diaphragm. So the aortic hiatus is way down right there, so I'm going to just kind of stick the probe there. And that's going to be the aortic hiatus, where the aorta goes through the diaphragm. And then we have the esophageal hiatus, so esophagus is here. And so esophageal hiatus would be right there. And then we have the caval foramen, so we'll kind of switch sides here. And the caval foramen is where that caudal vena cava then goes through the diaphragm. So that's going to be right here. So caval foramen. All right, then we'll move back over to the abdominal cavity here and look at the liver. So the liver has different parts to it. So this is the right side, this would be the left side. So the right side has a right medial lobe. So between my fingers is right medial. Then we have a right lateral right here. And then we will have a caudate lobe. So here's the fissure between the right lateral and the caudate. So this is all caudate right here. And the caudate lobe has two processes you need to know. So the caudate process here caps the kidney on the right side, so the caudate process of the caudate lobe. And then you kind of have to tilt the liver cranially a little bit. And you're again looking in that lesser curvature of the stomach and the lesser omentum, and you have this papillary process. So you can see that little piece of liver sticking through there, and that's the papillary process of the caudate lobe of the liver. All right, then while we're here, I'll just point out the quadrate lobe, which is this little guy here. And you can see the gallbladder here, and that's kind of your demarcation between that right medial lobe and the quadrate lobe here. So then on the left side, we just have left medial right here, and then left lateral here. So left side is a little easier there. All right, then we'll move on to that gallbladder I just showed you. We'll just look quickly here if I push this out of the way. Okay, so the gallbladder is here, and then we have hepatic ducts and the cystic duct. So the cystic duct is actually this, it's a little bit hard to see in this area, and try not to dig too deeply because we have some arteries and things we're doing on the next lab, so just very carefully dissect in this area. But you have the cystic duct here, So gallbladder here, cystic duct coming from the neck of the gallbladder there. You have hepatic ducts going to each lobe, coming from each lobe of the liver. And those connecting will make your bile duct here. So bile duct, hepatic duct here, there's a hepatic duct here, and then the cystic duct going up to the gallbladder. Okay, then we have the stomach. So this stomach was actually quite full, so it's sort of enlarged, but we'll do our best here to show you all the different parts. It's a little bit floppy. So here's the stomach. Again, we had that greater curvature here, lesser curvature here. So the esophagus actually comes in. I'll put the probe where the esophagus comes in, right there. And so that's the cardiac part of the stomach. So that initial part of the stomach is cardiac. And then you have the fundus, which is kind of this bulge then where my hand is. So cardiac, where the probe is, fundus, then where my fingers are going. And then you have the body, so that's going to be after the fundus, you curve around that greater curvature, and that would be the body. And then we come to the pyloric part of the stomach. So the pyloric part is broken down into the pyloric antrum and the pyloric canal. So the antrum would be where it starts to funnel down here. So the pyloric antrum is just this area where it starts to narrow down. And then the pyloric canal then is this narrower part here. So pyloric canal, and then you actually go through the pyloric sphincter. So the pylorus is actually right there. It's been cut here, and that's the sphincter that then leads into the duodenum. All right, and then we'll put things kind of over to the other side so you can see. And so then from the stomach, you go through the pylorus into the duodenum. So then you have your cranial duodenal flexure, and that's going to be right here. So here would be that flexure as we enter the duodenum. And then you have descending duodenum, down. Then you have a caudal duodenal flexure here. And then we have the ascending part of the duodenum here. So again, we'll just go through that quickly. So cranial duodenal flexure here, descending part, caudal duodenal flexure here, ascending part. Okay, then we have the duodenal jejunal flexure, which can be a little bit difficult to see. I'm going to have to shove everything to the other side. Here we go. So here we have that ascending duodenum, and then the duodenal jejunal flexure will be this last curve before it becomes the jejunum. So then all of the rest of this that you see here is all jejunum. One thing to note about jejunum is the mesenteric lymph nodes here. They tend to be quite large and very obvious. So all of this is all lymph nodes. Mesenteric lymph nodes there. All right, then we have from jejunum, you'll then move into the ileum. So you kind of follow the jejunum along, and then eventually it will stop in this. And I look for the cecum as my stopping point. So here's the cecum, and then you back up just a little bit from the cecum, and you'll have the ileum. So here is jejunum in my left hand, and then here would be the ileum in my right hand. So there is a palpable difference. You can feel the thickness changes from jejunum to ileum. Ileum gets a little bit thicker. And then you can also look for this, it's called the antimesenteric artery here. And so if you look for that, that kind of demarcates the length of the ileum there. So this is ileum. Then we're into cecum, just this little blind pouch, kind of shaped like a little S in the dog here. So this is cecum. And then your cecum and your ileum go into the colon. And so here I've made a couple of cuts, which you'll also do to try and see those openings. So we have the ileocolic orifice, which I'm going to put the forceps through from the ileum and then open it up in the colon here. So hopefully you can see there's the forceps coming through that ileocolic orifice. And then we'll move over to the cecum. Here I'll put the probe through on this one and then open up that colon again. And you can see that's coming through the cecocolic orifice. So that one's coming from the cecum, whereas this one right here is coming from the ileum, right there. Okay. Then we just have the colon. So we have the ascending part of the colon, which is very short, so just between my fingers there, ascending. Then we have, this is the right colic flexure because it's on the right side of the animal. Then we move into transverse colon, moving across the body from right to left. So transverse is just right here. Then you have a left colic flexure, and my dog actually has a little bit of an abnormal contraction here, right here, a narrowing here. And so this is kind of where that left colic flexure is. And then you have descending colon here. And that will then move into where the rectum would be, but we can't quite see where that is. But down there, where that enters would be the rectum as it tries to exit the body. So descending colon, then transitions to rectum and the pelvis down there. So, all right, we'll go back up just for, move all the jejunum out of the way. So ascending colon was here, and this is transverse here, very short, and then descending is that longer part of colon there. And I believe that's it for lab 16.